What if the greatest source of your suffering is not your past, not your difficult childhood, not the people who hurt you, not your bad luck, not even the problems you're facing right now? What if the real source of your pain is something so deeply woven into your mind that you've never questioned it? What if the very thing you've relied on for safety is the thing silently destroying your peace? Think about that for a moment, because what you're about to hear may completely change the way you see your life. Most people wake up every morning carrying invisible chains. They don't see them, they don't hear them, but they feel their weight. The chain of needing certainty, the chain of needing answers, the chain of needing people to behave a certain way, the chain of needing life to unfold according to a plan. And the strange thing is this: most people call these chains responsibility. They call them preparation. They call them ambition. They call them love. But Buddhism calls them something else: attachment. And attachment has a hidden twin: control. For years, maybe even your entire life, you've been taught that control is strength. Control your future. Control your emotions. Control your image. Control your relationships. Control your success. Control your destiny. The world celebrates people who appear in control. The person with the perfect plan, the perfect career, the perfect relationship, the perfect future. But beneath the surface, something terrifying is happening. The harder people try to control life, the more anxious they become. The more they try to secure every outcome, the more fear enters their minds. The more they try to prevent loss, the more they suffer from the possibility of losing. And eventually they find themselves trapped in a prison they built with their own hands. A prison made of expectations. A prison made of fear. A prison made of resistance. A prison made of control. Have you ever noticed something strange? Some people have everything they once dreamed of and still cannot sleep at night. They have money, success, recognition, relationships. Yet anxiety follows them everywhere. Meanwhile, someone else with far less appears calm, grounded, and deeply at peace. Why? What is the difference? The answer has very little to do with what they possess, and everything to do with what possesses them. One person owns many things, but is owned by nothing. The other appears successful, but is owned by fear, owned by expectations, owned by attachment, owned by the desperate need to make life obey their plans. This is the hidden suffering few people ever talk about. Most people are not exhausted because life is difficult. They are exhausted because they are trying to control things that were never theirs to control. Think about how much energy disappears every single day because of this. How many hours have been spent replaying conversations, How many nights have been lost worrying about things that never happened? How many relationships have been damaged because someone tried to force an outcome? How many opportunities have been missed because fear demanded certainty first? How many beautiful moments have gone unnoticed because the mind was too busy trying to control tomorrow? The tragedy is not that life is uncertain. The tragedy is that people spend their entire lives fighting uncertainty instead of understanding it. Imagine standing in the middle of a river. The current moves naturally downstream, but instead of flowing with it, you decide to fight it. You push, you struggle, you exhaust yourself. You become frustrated. Eventually, your body becomes weak. Your muscles ache. Your spirit becomes tired. And then you look at the river and call it your enemy. But the river was never your enemy. Your resistance was. This is how many people live, every single day, fighting reality, arguing with reality, negotiating with reality, demanding that reality become something different before they allow themselves to feel peace. If this person changes, then I'll be happy. If I get this opportunity, then I'll relax. If the future becomes certain, then I'll stop worrying. If life goes according to plan, then I'll finally feel safe. But life never signs those contracts, because life was never designed to give permanent certainty. Everything changes, everything moves, everything evolves, everything eventually leaves. The seasons change, the weather changes, people change, dreams change, bodies change, relationships change. Even the version of yourself you are today will eventually disappear and become someone new. This is one of the most profound truths in Buddhism. Impermanence is not a problem to solve. It is the nature of existence itself. And yet, most suffering begins when the mind refuses to accept this. The mind wants permanence. It wants guarantees. It wants promises. It wants certainty. It wants control. But life keeps whispering the same message. Let go. Not because life wants to punish you, but because life wants to free you. Several years ago, a young woman named Emily sat alone in a small park outside Chicago. It was late afternoon. The sky was turning orange. Children were laughing in the distance. Birds moved through the trees. Everything around her was peaceful. Yet inside, a storm was raging. For months, she had been trapped in anxiety. She worried about work. She worried about relationships. She worried about the future. She worried about making mistakes. She worried about opportunities she hadn't even lost yet. Her mind never stopped. Every day felt like a battle. Every night felt like preparation for another battle. And the strange thing was that almost none of the things she feared were actually happening. They existed only in her imagination. In that moment, sitting alone on the bench, she noticed something. The sun was still shining. The trees were still moving. Life was still unfolding. But her mind was somewhere else entirely. It was trying to control a future that did not yet exist. Suddenly, a painful realization appeared. The future wasn't hurting her. Her attempt to control it was. And for the first time, she understood something that many people spend years trying to learn. The mind can create suffering even in peaceful circumstances. Because suffering often comes from resistance, not reality. This realization became the beginning of her transformation. Not because her problems disappeared. They didn't. Life remained unpredictable. Challenges still arrived. Uncertainty still existed. But something inside her began to change. She stopped asking, "How can I control everything?" and started asking, "What actually belongs to me?" That question would eventually transform her entire life, and it may transform yours too, because most people never stop long enough to ask it. They continue trying to control the uncontrollable, trying to manage other people's opinions, trying to predict every outcome, trying to avoid every disappointment, trying to eliminate every risk, trying to create certainty in a world built on change. And little by little, their peace disappears. Not because life took it from them, because they traded it away. The Buddha taught something quietly revolutionary. Your peace does not come from controlling life. Your peace comes from understanding your relationship with life. Read that again. Your peace does not come from controlling life. Your peace comes from understanding your relationship with life. This changes everything. Because if peace depends on control, you will always be vulnerable. There will always be uncertainty. There will always be change. There will always be things beyond your reach. But if peace comes from how you respond to uncertainty, then peace becomes available right now. Not after everything is fixed. Not after every question is answered. Not after every problem disappears. Right now, in this moment. This is where true power begins. Not the power to control people, not the power to control outcomes, not the power to control the future, but the power to remain centered even when life refuses to follow your script. And perhaps that is the freedom you've been searching for all along. Not freedom from uncertainty, freedom from the need for certainty, not freedom from change, freedom from resisting change, not freedom from life's challenges, freedom from allowing those challenges to own your inner world. Because the greatest illusion is believing that control creates safety. In reality, the constant need for control creates fear. And the moment you finally loosen your grip, something extraordinary begins to happen. Life feels lighter. Your breathing becomes deeper. Your thoughts become quieter. Your heart becomes softer. Your spirit becomes free. The river keeps flowing. The seasons keep changing. Life keeps unfolding. But you are no longer fighting it. You are finally learning how to move with it. And that is where peace begins. Before we continue, if this message is speaking to something deep inside you, take a moment to support the channel by subscribing. Every subscription helps us continue creating these teachings on Buddhism, inner peace, emotional freedom, and spiritual growth for people who need them most. And now, I want to ask you a simple question. Be honest with yourself. Which of these sounds more like your life right now? A. I spend a lot of energy worrying about things I cannot control. B. I am learning to trust life and focus only on what I can control. Comment A or B below. I'm curious to see how many people are still fighting the river, and how many have started learning to flow with it. There is a question that quietly determines the quality of every human life. Most people never ask it, and because they never ask it, they spend years exhausted, overwhelmed, and emotionally drained without fully understanding why. The question is simple. What actually belongs to you? At first, the answer seems obvious. Your house, your career, your money, your relationships, your goals. But if you look deeper, you begin to realize something surprising. Very little of what you think belongs to you is actually yours. The people you love have minds of their own. The future has its own timing. The world follows its own rhythm. Even your circumstances can change overnight. And yet most people spend their lives trying to manage all of these things as though they own them. That is where the suffering begins. Not because life is unfair, not because life is against you, but because your energy is being invested in places where it has no power. Imagine waking up every morning and carrying two invisible buckets. The first bucket contains things you can influence. Your choices, your actions, your habits, your mindset, your integrity, your effort. The second bucket contains things you cannot control. Other people's opinions, other people's decisions, the past, the future, timing, outcomes, unexpected events. Most people spend their lives pouring all their energy into the second bucket, and at the end of the day, they wonder why they feel empty. The answer is simple. They are watering soil that does not belong to them. Meanwhile, the garden that actually belongs to them remains neglected. This is one of the most painful realities of modern life. People have become experts at monitoring things they cannot change. They monitor who likes them, who doesn't, who replied, who didn't, who approves, who disapproves, who stayed, who left, who noticed them, who ignored them, hour after hour, day after day, year after year. Without realizing it, they are slowly giving away their power. Because attention is energy, and wherever your attention goes, your life follows. This is why so many people feel emotionally exhausted. Not because they are carrying too much responsibility, but because they are carrying responsibility for things that were never theirs. A few months after the realization she had in the park outside Chicago, Emily found herself facing another difficult season. Life had not suddenly become easier. In fact, several things seemed to be going wrong at once. A project at work wasn't unfolding the way she expected. A friendship felt distant. Several plans she had carefully arranged began falling apart. The old version of Emily would have panicked. She would have analyzed every detail. She would have searched for ways to fix everything. She would have spent countless nights trying to solve problems that did not yet exist. But something inside her had started changing. One evening, she sat alone in her apartment and wrote 2 columns on a piece of paper. On one side, she wrote, "Things I can't control." On the other side, she wrote, "Things I can control." At first, it seemed like a simple exercise, but what happened next surprised her. Nearly everything causing her anxiety ended up in the first column. How other people felt, whether plans worked out, how quickly opportunities appeared, what others thought of her, how the future would unfold. All of it sat in the column she could not control. Meanwhile, the second column was much smaller. Her attitude, her effort, her honesty, her discipline, her kindness, her response. For several minutes, she simply stared at the page. Then a realization hit her. She had been sacrificing her peace for things she never had authority over in the first place. And suddenly, she understood why she felt so tired. She had been fighting battles she could never win. This realization is uncomfortable because it forces us to confront a truth most people spend their lives avoiding. The majority of our emotional suffering comes from attempting to manage realities that do not belong to us. We want people to understand us. We want them to choose us. We want them to agree with us. We want them to value us. We want circumstances to cooperate with us. We want life to move according to our preferred timeline. And when these things do not happen, frustration appears. But frustration often reveals an attachment to control. Because hidden beneath frustration is usually a belief that reality should be different from what it is. Buddhist wisdom teaches something radical. Peace begins the moment you stop arguing with reality. Think about how much emotional energy is consumed by resistance. Someone leaves, you resist. A plan changes. You resist A chapter ends, you resist. An opportunity disappears, you resist. Reality says one thing, your mind says another. And that conflict creates suffering. But what happens when you stop fighting? Not giving up, not becoming passive, simply seeing clearly. Something remarkable happens. Energy returns, because acceptance requires far less effort than resistance. There is a story about a man named Michael who learned this lesson during one of the most painful periods of his life. Several years earlier, he had experienced a breakup that left him completely devastated. The relationship had become central to his identity, his plans, his future, his sense of security. Everything seemed connected to it. When the relationship ended, his world felt shattered. For months, he walked through life carrying invisible questions. Why did this happen? Could he have prevented it? What was she thinking? Would she ever come back? Every day became an investigation. Every memory became evidence. Every silence became another mystery to solve. One autumn afternoon, he found himself walking through Central Park in New York. The leaves were falling. The air was cool. The city moved around him as it always had. Yet his mind remained trapped in the past. As he sat on a bench watching the trees, something became painfully obvious. The relationship was over. Reality had already made its decision. Yet he was still trying to negotiate with it. His suffering was no longer coming from the breakup. His suffering was coming from his refusal to stop fighting what had already happened. That realization changed everything, because for the first time, he stopped asking, "How do I get my old life back?" and started asking, "What kind of life can I build from here?" The difference between those two questions is enormous. One is focused on what has been lost. The other is focused on what remains possible. One looks backward. The other looks forward. One drains energy. The other creates it. This is the hidden freedom that emerges when you focus only on what belongs to you. You stop wasting your life trying to rewrite chapters that have already ended. You stop trying to control people who have already made their choices. You stop trying to predict futures that have not arrived. And you begin investing in the only place where your power truly exists. The present moment. Many people are waiting for closure, waiting for explanations, waiting for apologies, waiting for understanding. They believe healing is something another person must give them. But healing rarely works that way. Sometimes closure never arrives. Sometimes explanations never come. Sometimes apologies remain forever unspoken. If your peace depends on receiving those things, your peace remains hostage. This is why so many people remain emotionally stuck. They are waiting for permission to move forward, waiting for someone else to unlock a door that only they can open. But Buddhist wisdom points toward a different path. A path of inner authority. A path where healing becomes your responsibility. A path where peace is no longer dependent on external cooperation. There is extraordinary freedom in realizing that you do not need every answer. You do not need every explanation. You do not need every loose end tied together. Sometimes peace comes not from understanding everything, but from accepting that not everything will be understood. This shift creates a deeper kind of confidence. Not confidence in the future, confidence in yourself. Most people spend their lives seeking certainty. But certainty is fragile. Life changes too quickly. Circumstances move too fast. The future remains too unpredictable. Self-trust is different. Self-trust says, whatever happens, I will find a way through it. Whatever changes, I will adapt. Whatever ends, I will survive. Whatever begins, I will grow. This is far more powerful than certainty, because certainty depends on circumstances. Self-trust depends on you, and self-trust grows every time you bring your attention back to what is yours. Your choices, your values, your actions, your mindset, your response. Little by little, something changes. The future stops feeling like a threat. The unknown stops feeling like an enemy. Life becomes less about controlling outcomes and more about participating fully in the journey. You stop measuring every day according to what happened outside of you, and begin measuring it according to who you became within it. Did you act with integrity? Did you remain kind? Did you stay grounded? Did you learn? Did you grow? These questions create a different kind of life. A life rooted in inner strength rather than external circumstances. A life guided by wisdom rather than fear. A life built on what is yours rather than what never was. And perhaps this is the lesson most people spend decades trying to learn. You were never meant to carry the entire world. You were never meant to manage everyone's feelings. You were never meant to control every outcome. You were never meant to predict every future. You were never meant to fix everything. Your task is much simpler and much more powerful: to take responsibility for what belongs to you, and to release what does not. Because the moment you stop carrying what was never yours, you discover how light life can actually feel. And for the first time in a very long time, you begin to understand what freedom truly means. There is a moment that changes a person's life forever. It is not the moment they become successful. It is not the moment they find love. It is not the moment they achieve a dream. It is the moment they realize that not everything deserves a reaction. Most people never reach this realization. They spend their lives being pulled in every direction by whatever happens around them. A comment changes their mood. A text message changes their confidence. A stranger's opinion changes their self-worth. A delay creates anxiety. A rejection creates self-doubt. A disappointment creates despair. Without noticing it, they become emotional prisoners. Not prisoners of other people, not prisoners of circumstances, prisoners of reaction. This is one of the deepest forms of suffering in modern life. Because reaction feels natural, it feels justified, it feels automatic. Someone hurts you. You react. Someone ignores you. You react. Something goes wrong. You react. Someone disagrees with you. You react. Life becomes a series of emotional reflexes. One event triggers another. One feeling triggers another. One thought triggers another. And before long, your entire inner world is being controlled by things outside yourself. This is where Buddhist wisdom introduces a profound shift. A shift so simple that many people overlook it, yet so powerful that it can transform the way you experience every day of your life. You are not your reactions. You are the awareness that notices them. Most people have spent so long identifying with every emotion that they no longer recognize the difference. They think, I am angry. I am anxious. I am overwhelmed. I am broken. But what if those statements are not entirely true? What if anger is simply visiting? What if anxiety is passing through? What if sadness is moving across your inner landscape the same way clouds move across the sky? The sky does not become the storm. The sky contains the storm. And your awareness works the same way. The problem is that most people have forgotten they are the sky. They have become obsessed with the weather. Every emotional storm becomes an emergency. Every uncomfortable feeling becomes a crisis. Every passing thought becomes a prediction. As a result, they live in a constant state of emotional turbulence. Several months after her realization in Chicago, Emily noticed something strange. The situations in her life had not changed dramatically. Work still contained uncertainty. Relationships still had challenges. Unexpected problems still appeared. Yet something felt different. For the first time in years, she was beginning to observe her mind instead of immediately obeying it. One morning, she received an email that would normally have ruined her entire day. A project she had worked on for weeks was suddenly delayed. The old Emily would have spiraled immediately. She would have imagined worst-case scenarios. She would have worried about how others perceived her. She would have spent hours trapped inside fear. But this time, something different happened. The fear still appeared. The anxiety still arrived. The disappointment was still real. Yet she noticed them. She watched them. She felt them, but she did not immediately become them. For the first time, there was space between the emotion and the reaction. And inside that space, she discovered something powerful: choice. Most people believe freedom means doing whatever they want. But true freedom is something much deeper. True freedom is the ability to choose your response rather than being controlled by your first impulse. This is one of the greatest powers a human being can develop, because life will always present situations that trigger emotion. There is no escaping that. No amount of spiritual growth will prevent disappointment. No amount of wisdom will prevent grief. No amount of mindfulness will eliminate uncertainty. You will still feel, you will still hurt, you will still struggle. The difference is that those experiences no longer own you. There is a silent gap that exists between every event and every response. Most people never notice it. They move too quickly. Someone criticizes them. Immediate reaction. Someone rejects them. Immediate reaction. Someone misunderstands them. Immediate reaction. Someone disappoints them. Immediate reaction. Years pass this way. Entire lives pass this way. But Buddhist practice teaches something different. Slow down. Observe. Pause. Breathe, become aware. Because awareness creates distance. And distance creates freedom. The world today is designed to encourage reaction. Social media rewards outrage. News cycles reward fear. Algorithms reward emotional intensity. Everything is competing for your attention. Everything wants a reaction. Everything wants access to your nervous system. Every notification, every headline, every controversy, every opinion. And the more reactive you become, the easier you are to control. Think about that carefully. The easiest person to manipulate is not the weakest person. It is the most reactive person. Because if someone can predict your emotional reactions, they can influence your behavior. If someone knows exactly what triggers your anger, they can control your attention. If someone knows exactly what activates your fear, they can control your decisions. If someone knows exactly what creates insecurity within you, they can influence your self-worth. Reaction creates vulnerability. Awareness creates strength. This is why emotionally mature people often appear calm. Not because they feel less, not because they care less, but because they understand something most people do not. Every feeling does not deserve immediate action. A thought is not an instruction. A fear is not a prophecy. An emotion is not a command. Many people spend years obeying feelings that were never meant to lead them. Fear tells them not to try. Insecurity tells them they are not enough. Anger tells them to attack. Anxiety tells them disaster is coming. But feelings are often temporary, and temporary emotions should not be allowed to make permanent decisions. One afternoon, while sitting in Central Park, Michael found himself revisiting memories from his old relationship. Months had passed. The relationship was long over. Yet suddenly, an old memory surfaced. Within seconds, sadness appeared, then regret, then longing, then self-doubt. The familiar cycle began. In the past, he would have followed every thought. He would have spent hours replaying old conversations, hours analyzing what went wrong, hours reopening wounds that had already begun healing. But this time, he noticed the pattern. A memory appeared, then a feeling, then a story, then suffering. For the first time, he interrupted the process, not by suppressing it, not by denying it, simply by observing it. The sadness remained for a while, then gradually it faded. And in that moment, he learned a lesson that transformed his healing. Not every emotion requires participation. Sometimes emotions simply need witnessing. This is where many people become trapped. They assume healing means fixing every feeling, explaining every feeling, analyzing every feeling. But often, healing means allowing a feeling to exist without turning it into an identity. A feeling of loneliness is not proof that you are alone. A feeling of failure is not proof that you are failing. A feeling of fear is not proof that danger is present. The mind creates stories around emotions, and those stories often become far more painful than the emotions themselves. Buddhist teachings frequently describe the mind as a storyteller. Its job is to interpret, predict, explain, label. But the mind is not always accurate. Sometimes it creates narratives based on old wounds, old fears, old conditioning, old experiences. And if you never question those narratives, they quietly begin controlling your life. This is why awareness is so powerful. Awareness allows you to step back and ask, is this true? Or is this simply a story my mind is creating? That question alone can dissolve enormous amounts of suffering. Because many emotional storms are fueled not by reality, but by interpretation. Two people can experience the exact same event and respond completely differently. One sees rejection. The other sees redirection. One sees failure. The other sees growth. One sees loss. The other sees transformation. The event is identical. The interpretation is different, and interpretation shapes experience. This is why inner mastery matters, because the quality of your life is determined less by what happens to you and more by how you relate to what happens. There comes a point on the spiritual path, when you stop trying to control every emotion and begin understanding them instead. You stop fighting sadness. You stop fearing anxiety. You stop resisting discomfort. You stop running from uncertainty. You become curious. You become present. You become observant. And suddenly, emotions lose much of their power. Not because they disappear, because you stop feeding them. Imagine throwing a log into a fire. The fire grows. Throw another log. It grows larger. Most emotional suffering works exactly the same way. The original emotion appears. Then the mind adds fear, judgment, resistance, catastrophic thinking. And suddenly, a small feeling becomes a massive fire. Awareness removes the extra fuel. You experience the feeling without multiplying it. This is emotional wisdom, and emotional wisdom creates stability. Eventually, something remarkable begins to happen. People notice a difference in you. Situations that once triggered you no longer have the same effect. Words that once wounded you lose their power. Delays no longer create panic. Criticism no longer destroys your confidence. Rejection no longer defines your worth. Life still happens, but it no longer controls your inner world. You become like a mountain, standing quietly through changing seasons. Storms come. Storms go. The mountain remains. This is what it means to become unshakable. Not perfect, not emotionless, not invincible. Simply rooted, grounded, aware, free. Because true strength is not found in controlling the world around you. True strength is found in no longer allowing the world around you to control you. And the day you learn that lesson is the day your inner freedom truly begins. There is a heartbreak that few people talk about. Not the heartbreak of losing someone, not the heartache of being rejected, not even the heartbreak of saying goodbye. It is the heartbreak of realizing how long you have been running after people who were never running toward you. For many people, this realization arrives slowly, almost invisibly. One day they notice they are always the first to call, always the first to apologize, always the first to reach out, always the one trying to keep everything together. At first, it feels noble. It feels loving. It feels loyal. But eventually, exhaustion begins to appear. And exhaustion has a way of revealing truths that hope has been hiding. Because hope can be beautiful. But sometimes, hope becomes a blindfold. Sometimes hope convinces you to stay where wisdom is asking you to leave. Sometimes hope convinces you to continue investing where nothing is growing. Sometimes hope keeps you chasing people who have already stopped walking beside you. One of the hardest lessons in life is learning the difference between nurturing a relationship and carrying it. Many people do not realize there is a difference. They believe that if they care enough, love enough, sacrifice enough, forgive enough, eventually everything will work out. So they keep giving, they keep waiting, they keep understanding, they keep excusing, they keep hoping, and little by little they begin disappearing from their own lives. Because every time you abandon your needs to secure someone else's presence, a small part of you is left behind. Most emotional exhaustion does not come from loving others. It comes from loving others while neglecting yourself. That is why chasing is so dangerous. It disguises itself as devotion. But underneath, it is often fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of loneliness, fear of being forgotten, fear of not being enough, fear of starting over, fear of facing life without the person you have built your identity around. And fear is a powerful storyteller. Fear whispers, if you try harder, they'll stay. If you love them more, they'll change. If you wait long enough, they'll finally see your value. If you sacrifice enough, they'll appreciate you. Fear keeps people trapped inside relationships that have already ended emotionally. It keeps them holding on to versions of people that no longer exist. It keeps them investing in potential while ignoring reality. Sophia learned this lesson in a way she never expected. Living in San Diego, she had spent years maintaining a friendship that meant everything to her. At least, that was what she believed. Whenever communication faded, she reached out. Whenever distance appeared, she closed the gap. Whenever conflict surfaced, she repaired it. Whenever effort was needed, she provided it. For a long time, she told herself this was what loyalty looked like. Then, one evening, after another week of unanswered messages, she sat quietly and asked herself a question she had never asked before. What would happen if I stopped? Not forever, not out of anger, not to punish anyone, just stopped. Stopped initiating, stopped fixing, stopped carrying, stopped chasing. The answer arrived slowly. Days passed, then weeks, then months. The silence remained. No effort appeared, no concern emerged. No genuine attempt to reconnect followed. At first, the truth hurt deeply, because what she discovered was not that she had lost a friendship. What she discovered was that she had been carrying one, and carrying something alone does not make it a relationship. It makes it a burden. This realization shattered something inside her. But it also freed her, because for the first time, she could see clearly. And clarity is often the beginning of liberation. One of the most painful things attachment does is distort vision. When you are attached to someone, you stop seeing who they are. you start seeing who you hope they will become. You focus on rare moments while ignoring consistent patterns. You remember the one beautiful weekend and forget the 12 difficult months. You cling to occasional kindness while excusing repeated neglect. You become emotionally invested in potential. And potential can be one of the most dangerous addictions a person experiences. Because potential is not reality. Potential is imagination. Reality is behavior. Reality is consistency. Reality is what someone repeatedly shows you. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering grows whenever we become attached to illusions. And one of the greatest illusions is believing that someone will become who we need them to be if we simply wait long enough. The truth is often simpler. People reveal themselves every day, not through promises, not through intentions, not through words, through actions. Actions are truth in motion. And once you begin paying attention to actions, many relationships become much easier to understand. Someone who values you creates time for you. Someone who respects you respects your boundaries. Someone who cares about you demonstrates effort. Someone who loves you does not require constant convincing. This does not mean relationships are perfect. It does not mean people never make mistakes. It simply means that genuine care reveals itself through consistency. Many people spend years listening to what people say while ignoring what people do. But actions tell stories words cannot hide. Another man named Ethan discovered this after years of being everyone's emotional rescuer. Friends called him whenever they had problems. Family members leaned on him whenever they struggled. Co-workers relied on him. Partners depended on him. At first, being needed felt meaningful. It made him feel valuable, important, necessary. But eventually, he noticed something. Very few people were showing up for him. Very few people asked how he was doing. Very few people noticed when he was struggling. He had become the emotional foundation beneath everyone else's life while neglecting his own. One day, exhausted and emotionally depleted, he decided to set a simple boundary. He would continue being kind, continue being supportive, continue being compassionate. But he would stop sacrificing his well-being to save people who were unwilling to save themselves. The response shocked him. Some people respected the change immediately. Others became uncomfortable. Some grew distant. A few became angry. And suddenly, Ethan understood something profound. Many people had not loved his presence. They had loved his availability. There is an enormous difference. One values who you are. The other values what you provide. And detachment reveals that difference with startling clarity. The moment you stop overgiving, you discover who actually values the relationship. The moment you stop initiating, you discover who genuinely wants connection. The moment you stop rescuing, you discover who is willing to take responsibility for their own growth. Detachment removes illusions. That is why it can feel painful at first. Illusions are often comforting. Reality is often uncomfortable. But reality is where freedom lives. One of the greatest fears people have is the fear of being alone. This fear drives countless unhealthy attachments. It keeps people in relationships that diminish them. It keeps them tolerating disrespect. It keeps them accepting less than they deserve. It keeps them chasing people who repeatedly show them they are not a priority. Because loneliness feels frightening, at least at first. But there is something many people never discover. Loneliness and solitude are not the same thing. Loneliness is the absence of connection. Solitude is the presence of yourself, and learning to enjoy your own company changes everything. Because when you genuinely enjoy your own presence, desperation disappears. You stop needing people to complete you. You stop begging for attention. You stop chasing validation. You stop settling for crumbs because you fear having nothing. Instead, you begin approaching relationships from a place of wholeness. And wholeness changes the questions you ask. You stop asking, "How do I keep them?" and start asking, "Are they aligned with the life I want to create?" You stop asking, "Why don't they choose me?" and start asking, "Why am I choosing someone who consistently shows me they do not value me?" You stop asking, "What if they leave?" and start asking, "What happens if I continue abandoning myself to make them stay?" Those questions change lives because they shift attention inward, back toward self-respect, back toward self-worth, back toward truth. Perhaps the most beautiful transformation occurs when you realize that letting go is not an act of rejection. It is an act of acceptance. Acceptance that not everyone is meant to stay forever. Acceptance that not every relationship is meant to become permanent. Acceptance that some people are lessons. Some are chapters. Some are mirrors. Some are teachers. And some are simply temporary companions on the journey. The suffering begins when we demand permanence from what was only meant to be temporary. But peace begins when we allow people to be who they are, without forcing, without chasing, without controlling, without sacrificing ourselves in the process. Because love becomes healthier when fear leaves the room. Connection becomes healthier when desperation disappears. Relationships become healthier when they are built on mutual choice rather than emotional dependency. This is the freedom Sophia eventually discovered. This is the freedom Ethan eventually embraced. And this is the freedom available to anyone willing to stop chasing. The day you stop chasing people is not the day you stop caring. It is not the day your heart becomes cold. It is not the day you stop loving. It is the day you finally trust that what is meant for your life will not require you to abandon yourself to keep it. It is the day you stop confusing effort with worthiness. The day you stop confusing sacrifice with love. The day you stop confusing attachment with connection. And when that day arrives, something extraordinary happens. Your heart becomes lighter. Your mind becomes quieter. Your boundaries become stronger. Your relationships become clearer. And your peace becomes more valuable than your fear of being alone. Because you finally understand a truth that changes everything. The right people do not need to be chased. And the people who truly belong in your life will never require you to lose yourself in order to keep them there. There comes a point in every spiritual journey when a person realizes that letting go of people is not the hardest thing. Letting go of control is not the hardest thing. Even letting go of painful memories is not the hardest thing. The hardest thing is letting go of the future. Because the future is where the mind hides its deepest attachments. It is where fear disguises itself as planning. It is where anxiety disguises itself as preparation. It is where control disguises itself as responsibility. And for most people, the future becomes a place they visit so often that they forget how to live in the present. Think about how much of your life has been spent somewhere that does not exist. Not in the room where you are sitting. Not in the day you are living. Not in the moment unfolding before your eyes, but in a future that has never arrived. A future your mind constantly rehearses, constantly predicts, constantly tries to manage. What if it works? What if it fails? What if I lose everything? What if I make the wrong choice? What if I miss my chance? What if I'm too late? What if life never becomes what I hoped it would be? For many people, these questions become background noise, so familiar that they barely notice them anymore. Yet those questions quietly shape every decision, every emotion, every expectation, and most importantly, every fear, because beneath nearly every anxiety about the future lies a single desire, the desire for guarantees. The mind wants certainty before commitment, certainty before action, certainty before trust, certainty before peace. But life has never operated that way. Life has never offered guarantees. And perhaps that is exactly why so many people struggle. They are asking life to provide something it was never designed to give. The future remains unwritten. The road remains unseen. The next chapter remains unknown. And no amount of worrying can change that. No amount of overthinking can solve it. No amount of fear can prevent uncertainty. Yet millions of people continue trying. Not because they are weak, but because they are afraid. Afraid that uncertainty means danger. Afraid that not knowing means failure. Afraid that if they loosen their grip, everything will fall apart. But what if the opposite is true? What if the very grip you refuse to release is the source of your suffering? What if the peace you have been searching for exists on the other side of surrender? Not surrender as defeat. Surrender as trust. Trust in life. Trust in growth. Trust in timing. Trust in yourself. This was the lesson Noah struggled to learn. For years, he had built his life around a vision of the future. Living in Seattle, he had mapped out every step, every goal, every milestone, every achievement. His future felt organized, predictable, secure. He believed that if he worked hard enough and planned carefully enough, life would reward him with certainty. Then one unexpected decision changed everything. A career opportunity he had spent years pursuing disappeared, just like that. One conversation, one decision, one moment, and the future he had imagined was gone. At first, Noah felt devastated, not simply because he lost the opportunity, but because he lost the future he had attached himself to. The life he had been rehearsing in his mind no longer existed, and that realization left him feeling lost. For months, he fought reality. He replayed conversations, questioned every choice, imagined alternate outcomes, searched for reasons, searched for explanations, searched for someone to blame. But none of it changed what had happened. One evening, while walking alone through the city, a difficult truth emerged. The future he lost had never actually existed. Only the present had existed. Only this moment had ever been real. Everything else had been imagination, possibility, expectation. And suddenly, he understood something profound. He had not lost reality. He had lost a story. That realization became the beginning of his freedom. Because once he stopped mourning the future he imagined, he became available to the future that was actually unfolding. This is one of the most mysterious aspects of life. Many of the events we initially call failures eventually become turning points. Many of the doors we desperately wanted to open eventually reveal themselves as doors that needed to remain closed. But we rarely see that in the moment. Because attachment narrows vision. Attachment convinces us that there is only one acceptable outcome, one acceptable path, one acceptable future. And when life chooses differently, we suffer. Not because life is wrong, but because we became attached to a specific version of how life should look. Several years after losing that opportunity, Noah found himself living a life he never could have planned. New experiences, new relationships, new opportunities, a completely different direction. And yet he felt more fulfilled than ever before. Not because everything was perfect, but because he had stopped demanding perfection from life. He had learned to participate instead of control, to trust instead of force, to flow instead of resist, and that changed everything. The truth is that most people are waiting for life to become certain before they allow themselves to feel peace. They tell themselves, "When I know what's going to happen, I'll relax. When I reach my goal, I'll be happy. When everything works out, I'll feel safe." But that day rarely comes, because every solved problem creates another question. Every achievement creates another goal. Every certainty eventually changes. Peace keeps getting postponed, moved further into the future, always waiting, never arriving. This is one of the great illusions of the human mind. It believes peace is a destination. But peace is not a destination. Peace is a relationship with uncertainty, a relationship built on trust. Emily eventually discovered this. The woman who once spent countless nights worrying about futures that had not arrived began noticing a transformation inside herself. The circumstances of her life still changed. Unexpected events still occurred. Challenges still appeared. Yet she no longer felt controlled by them, because something fundamental had shifted. She stopped asking, "How can I make life predictable?" and started asking, "How can I remain present regardless of what happens?" That question changed her relationship with uncertainty forever. Because uncertainty stopped feeling like a threat. It became space. Space for possibility. Space for growth. Space for experiences she could not yet imagine. And when uncertainty becomes possibility instead of danger, life becomes much lighter. Michael experienced a similar transformation. After spending so much time trapped in the past, he eventually realized that healing required trust. Trust that his life could still be meaningful without the future he once envisioned. Trust that joy could return. Trust that loss was not the end of his story. Trust that some chapters must close before others can begin. And perhaps most importantly, trust that he did not need to know exactly how everything would unfold. Many people mistakenly believe trust means certainty, but trust and certainty are opposites. Certainty says, "I know what will happen." Trust says, "I don't know what will happen, and I'm okay anyway." That is true inner strength, not prediction, not control, not guarantees. Trust. Buddhist teachings often compare life to planting seeds. You prepare the soil. You water consistently. You care patiently. But you cannot force the seed to grow. You cannot pull on the stem. You cannot demand flowers tomorrow. Growth happens in its own time. Life unfolds in much the same way. You are responsible for effort. You are responsible for intention. You are responsible for showing up fully. But outcomes belong to something larger. A larger process. A larger unfolding. A larger rhythm that cannot be rushed. Sophia eventually discovered this after learning to stop chasing people. For so long, she believed that enough effort could create connection. Enough patience could create reciprocity. Enough sacrifice could create love. But life taught her otherwise. Real connection cannot be forced. Real relationships cannot be manufactured. Real love cannot be controlled. Once she accepted this, something beautiful happened. Her energy returned. Because she stopped investing in outcomes she could not create alone. She started investing in herself, her growth, her peace, her purpose. And for the first time, she felt free. The same lesson transformed Ethan. After years of carrying everyone else's emotional burdens, he realized that trust also means allowing people to walk their own paths, allowing people to learn their own lessons, allowing people to face their own consequences. Compassion remained, kindness remained, love remained, but control disappeared, and with it, a tremendous amount of suffering disappeared as well. This is the final freedom. The freedom that arrives when you stop trying to manage life and begin participating in it. The freedom that arrives when you stop demanding guarantees before moving forward. The freedom that arrives when you stop asking the future to make promises, because the future never will. And perhaps it shouldn't, because uncertainty contains something. Certainty never could. Possibility, wonder, growth, transformation. Every meaningful chapter of your life emerged from uncertainty. Every important relationship began as uncertainty. Every opportunity started as uncertainty. Every transformation entered your life through uncertainty. The unknown is not your enemy. The unknown is where life happens. And once you understand this, a profound peace begins to emerge. You stop needing every answer. You stop needing every outcome. You stop needing every guarantee. You stop treating uncertainty as something to fear. Instead, you begin trusting something much deeper. Your ability to adapt, your ability to learn, your ability to grow, your ability to endure, your ability to remain whole regardless of what life brings. Because ultimately, peace does not come from knowing the future. Peace comes from knowing yourself. Knowing that whatever arrives, you can meet it. Whatever changes, you can adapt. Whatever ends, you can survive. Whatever begins, you can embrace. And when that understanding settles into your heart, life begins to feel different. The pressure softens, the fear loosens, the struggle quiets, the future loses its power to intimidate you. And for the first time, perhaps in many years, you experience something that cannot be purchased, achieved, forced, or controlled. You experience trust. And in that trust, you discover what the Buddha pointed toward all along. Not a life without uncertainty. Not a life without change. Not a life without endings. But a life where your peace is no longer dependent on controlling any of them. A life where you finally understand that the deepest security was never hidden in the future. It was always hidden within you. And that is the peace that arrives when you trust life. As we come to the end of this journey, it becomes clear that this was never really a story about Emily. It was never just a story about Michael, or Sophia, or Ethan, or Noah. Their stories may have sounded different on the surface. Different cities, different struggles, different chapters, different kinds of pain. Yet underneath every experience was the same human struggle. The struggle to hold on, the struggle to control, the struggle to force life into a shape that felt safe. And perhaps, if we are honest, that struggle is not unique to them. It belongs to all of us. Because every human being eventually encounters uncertainty. Every human being eventually faces loss. Every human being eventually experiences disappointment. Every human being eventually discovers that life does not always follow the script they carefully wrote in their mind. The question is not whether these moments will arrive. The question is how we will respond when they do. At the beginning of this journey, we met Emily, a woman who believed that peace could be found through control. Like so many people, she spent years trying to manage the future before it arrived, trying to predict outcomes, trying to avoid mistakes, trying to secure certainty in an uncertain world. She thought that if she worried enough, planned enough, prepared enough, she could protect herself from pain. But instead of finding safety, she found exhaustion. Because no matter how hard she tried, life continued changing. Unexpected situations appeared. Plans shifted. People changed. The future remained unpredictable. Eventually, Emily discovered something that changed her life forever. The future was not hurting her. Her attempt to control it was. And perhaps that realization is one of the most important lessons any person can learn. Many of us spend years fighting uncertainty. Yet uncertainty is not the enemy. It is simply part of being alive. The river was never the problem. The struggle against the river was. Then we met Michael, a man who spent months trapped inside a chapter that had already ended. His relationship was over. Reality had moved forward. Yet his mind remained in the past, searching, questioning, analyzing, negotiating with memories. Like many people, he believed that peace would come once he found the perfect explanation, the perfect answer, the perfect closure. But eventually, he discovered a deeper truth. Healing does not always arrive through understanding. Sometimes healing arrives through acceptance. Sometimes freedom begins the moment you stop asking reality to become different from what it already is. And how many people need to hear that today? How many people are still waiting for an apology that may never come? Still waiting for closure that may never arrive? Still waiting for someone else to give them permission to move forward? The truth is that life keeps moving, and the longer we wait for perfect answers, the more of our present we sacrifice. Then we explored a lesson that many people overlook, the lesson of reaction, the lesson that changed everything for both Emily and Michael. Most people believe their suffering comes from circumstances, but often suffering comes from what happens after the circumstance. The story the mind creates, the fear, the interpretation, the resistance, the endless cycle of emotional reactions. The moment we learn to pause, observe, and respond rather than react, something extraordinary happens. The world loses much of its power over us. We begin to understand that emotions are visitors, not masters. Thoughts are experiences, not commands. Feelings are temporary, not permanent truths. And suddenly, life becomes less chaotic, not because the storms disappear, but because we stop becoming every storm that passes through us. Then came perhaps one of the most painful lessons of all, the lesson Sophia and Ethan were forced to learn, the lesson of chasing. For years, both of them carried relationships that depended almost entirely on their effort, their energy, their sacrifice, their willingness to keep giving. At first, they called it loyalty. They called it love. They called it commitment. But eventually, reality revealed a difficult truth. A relationship carried by one person is not a relationship. It is a burden. And perhaps there are people listening right now who need to hear that. People who have spent years proving their worth, years trying to earn love, years trying to convince someone to stay, years abandoning themselves in order to avoid being abandoned by others. The lesson Sophia and Ethan discovered was not that love is dangerous. The lesson was that attachment is. Real love does not require you to lose yourself. Real love does not require endless chasing. Real love does not demand that you sacrifice your peace to keep it alive. The right people do not need to be convinced of your value. And perhaps the most liberating day of your life will be the day you stop chasing those who have already chosen a different direction. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself too. And then we arrived at the final lesson, the deepest lesson, the lesson Noah was destined to learn, the lesson many people spend an entire lifetime avoiding. Trust. Not trust that life will always go according to plan, because it won't. Not trust that every dream will unfold exactly as it expected, because it won't. Not trust that loss will never happen, or heartbreak will never happen, or uncertainty will disappear, because none of those things are true. The trust Noah discovered was something much deeper. Trust in himself. Trust in his ability to adapt. Trust in his ability to grow. Trust in his ability to survive endings and embrace beginnings. Trust in his ability to remain whole even when life changed unexpectedly. And that trust transformed everything. Because once you stop demanding guarantees from life, you become available to possibility. Once you stop forcing outcomes, you become available to growth. Once you stop clinging to one version of the future, you become available to futures you could never have imagined. And that may be the greatest lesson hidden within this entire journey. Life is not happening to you. Life is unfolding through you. Every challenge, every loss, every uncertainty, every ending, every beginning, each one shaping you into someone wiser, stronger, and more awake. But only if you allow it. Only if you stop fighting every lesson. Only if you stop demanding certainty before trust. Only if you stop asking life to be different before allowing yourself to feel peace. Because peace is not waiting at the end of the journey. Peace is the way you walk the journey. The Buddha taught that suffering begins when attachment begins, and freedom begins when attachment ends. Not because we stop caring, not because we become cold, not because we withdraw from life, but because we stop demanding that life obey our preferences before we allow ourselves to experience peace. That is the great paradox. The more tightly we hold, the more we suffer. The more wisely we release, the more peaceful we become. And perhaps that is why the people who seem strongest are often not the people who control the most. They are the people who have learned what to let go of. They have learned to let go of what they cannot control. Let go of what they cannot force. Let go of what they cannot predict. Let go of what they cannot keep forever. And because of that, they become free. Not free from problems, not free from uncertainty, not free from change, but free from being owned by them. If there is one lesson to carry with you after this story ends, let it be this: your peace does not belong to the future. Your peace does not belong to another person. Your peace does not belong to success. Your peace does not belong to circumstances. Your peace does not belong to outcomes. Your peace belongs to you. And the moment you stop handing it away to things you cannot control is the moment your life truly begins. So before we end, I want to ask you a simple question. Which of these feels most true for you right now? A. I am still struggling to let go of something I cannot control. B. I am learning to trust life and protect my inner peace. Comment A or B below. And if you'd like, share your story as well. What part of this journey resonated with you the most? Was it Emily's struggle with control? Michael's struggle with the past? Sophia's lesson about chasing people? Ethan's lesson about boundaries? Or Noah's lesson about trusting life? Share your thoughts in the comments. You never know who might read your words and feel less alone because of them. And if this message brought you value today, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue creating more content on Buddhist wisdom, emotional healing, inner peace, and spiritual growth. Thank you for spending this time with us. Until next time, take care of your mind, protect your peace, and remember, nothing outside of you owns your peace unless you give it permission.